one of these and try to address them. We need to look at them as a system, and that is what I will try and do today. But of course, these crises are also in many ways opportunities. They're opportunities that are driven by the fact that we know that a low-carbon world will happen. We know that because resource prices are increasing. We know that because we can't keep injecting carbon into the atmosphere and expect to get away with it. We know that in the long term that will be the wise choice. So the question then, and the question for Britain as well, is do you want to lead or do you want to stay behind? Because many other countries and nations are starting to see these opportunities and are investing heavily in them. And they may well reap the rewards. But at the same time, Britain is uniquely positioned in many ways in terms of skill, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of initiative to actually capitalize on some of these opportunities. And I think that's something that we really need to think about when we talk about competitiveness, which of course is part of the mantra today. So what I'd like to say is that in order to do that, we need a shift in the paradigm. We need a new economic approach where the government, business and society work together to create a great economy for Britain. This is an approach that builds on UK's strength and capabilities and capitalises on opportunities around the world. So what I want to do now is share with you what that vision might be. The discussion as to how we get there might be one that we can leave for the Q&A, or it'll certainly be one that we will keep going, talking about over weeks, months and years to come, because that is the key. Once you've decided what the vision is, how do we get there? And that vision, from my perspective, has 4 key characteristics that are socio-economic of nature, 4 characteristics that are environmental of nature, and 4 what I would call enabling attributes. Conditions without which we can't achieve a sustainable economy. So let me start by talking about the first socio-economic characteristics. So bear in mind, these are where we want to get to. Okay? And the first of those is high employment. Clearly, we want people to be able to contribute to society. We want people to gain financial independence, and we want people to have a sense of personal agency. And of course, in doing that, we create economic activity from which everyone benefits. So high employment is key. The second characteristic is appropriate debt. It's very hard to kind of find the right term for that. Is it low debt? No, not really, because debt is important. We need debt in order to fuel the engine of the economy quite often. But at the same time, that debt must remain within strict boundaries. The idea that we can mortgage our future to pay for short-term fixes to current problems is just not on. The third characteristic is high equity. And that talks about a fair balance between the distribution of wealth and the reward for effort and success. Clearly, we need to be able to help those people as a society who haven't had the fortune that some of us have had. But at the same time, we also need to make sure that people continue to be motivated to keep being successful, to keep wanting to improve themselves in many different ways. But if we do this, if we have high levels of equity, we have a high sense of fairness in society, we have high well-being, and we have high security overall. And the final socioeconomic characteristics is one that kind of is many ways, it's the counterbalancing to our focus on GDP that we've had pretty much since the Second World War, really, but quite strongly since the 1980s. The idea that GDP growth is the end in itself rather than the means to an end. And that counterbalance is a focus on well-being. I think if we look at what a society needs to do to be successful, it is not, by definition, have super high levels of growth. That may be the means to the end. But what is important is that people experience high level of well-being. What that means is things like access to education, access to healthcare, having their material needs met, their basic needs met, having the kind of social and community networks that enables them to be an active part of society, and also to participate in democratic process, etc. And there's some fantastic work going on in the area of well-being from the Office of National Statistics, and I think that kind of work needs to become central part of government policy going forward. Let's now move into the 4 environmental characteristics. And the first one of those, you won't be surprised, is low carbon. Clearly, we need to reduce our carbon intensity, and we need to do that for a variety of reasons that I won't bore you with because you're already familiar with them. But we also need to do that in a way that acknowledges that there is a global agenda here, and that some countries may well need to catch up with our carbon intensity and with our standard of living in order for them to be able to get to the level of developments that they need and deserve. So there are 2 points to this argument here. The second environmental characteristics is low resource intensity. So the idea that we need to be able to meet people's material needs, meet the needs of society, continue growing, if that's the option, in a way that minimizes the use of resources. And that doesn't mean that we use less and less resource over time because they've all been mined. No, that's not it at all. You may be familiar with this statistic that says there's actually more gold in microprocessors than there is underground. So if we can use those resources, if we can re-engage them effectively in order to fuel the economy, that's fine. Let's just not continue mining in a way that both destroys the environment, destroys communities, and has a detrimental impact on a much broader scale. And the third environmental characteristic related to this is the idea of zero waste. I think we need to get to a place where, in a vision of a sustainable economy, it is possible for every single output to become someone else's input. In other words, there is no more waste. Someone's waste becomes someone else's raw material. That is achievable. And the thinking is not new. The thing has been there since the 1980s, the concept of cradle to cradle. It's now being kind of materialized in ways that are really quite interesting through concepts like the circular economy, which you may have heard of through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So that there's some really interesting work going on in that area. And finally, in terms of the environmental characteristics, a sustainable society needs to be biodiverse. And that's not just the idea of doing less harm or stopping the harm that we're doing. It's actually, I believe, that a great economy must enable economic activity that helps to enhance and restore, not just protect, biodiversity. So those are what I feel are kind of the characteristics that will enable us to have a sustainable economy. But in order for us to get there are some key attributes that are needed, some key things that without which I don't believe we'll get there. And the first one of those is a long-term view. There's a wonderful Greek proverb that said that a great society is one where old men plant trees whose shade they know they will never sit in. And that's really what we need to think about. We need to think of that long term. We're not just here to meet the needs of today. We're also here because we've got a responsibility for future generations. And that long term thinking is not just about the environment, by the way. It's also about creating the conditions for an economy that is sustainable and that can continue. So what we need to do is we need to remove the short-termism that too often prevents the right economic decisions from being made, both by businesses and by politicians. Somehow or other we need to have that long-term mindset. The second enabling attribute is innovation. Clearly, constant innovation will be required. We cannot foresee what the future will bring, and we know that will be different to what we expect, and we know there will be challenges ahead. And it's only through innovating and through constantly having this mindset of innovation and renewal that we are able to adapt to whatever is thrown at us. But that innovation is not just technology. Yes, it is technology. It's a key part of it. And exploiting that technology and that innovation in order to create opportunities, commercial opportunities. But it's also innovation in processes, it's innovation in mindsets, it's innovation in business models, it's along the whole piece. The third enabler is inclusivity. Tim Berners-Lee said we need diversity of thought in the world to face the new challenges. And that diversity means that the solutions aren't in this room. Some of them may be, they may not even be in the Labour Party, they may not even be in Britain. But the solutions are out there. And I think we need to have an inclusive mindset that says, you know, we can find the solution, but we need to be open to getting everyone's perspective on this. And at the same time, we need to have a process that leads to everyone feeling involved in finding those solutions. I've spent quite a bit of time, of my own time, let's say, working with Transition Town Lewis. And one of the things that's really interesting there is that it is people who just come and want to be part of the solution. And everyone will do their little bits. And there'll be things that no one has thought of before. We created the local currency in Lewis. It'll be things that just happens to be what some people want to do. But there is a lot of innovation, there is a lot of drive to make the world a better place. But we need to be inclusive and open to that. And finally, the final characteristic, effectively, if you want, is I think it's one of a change in mindset. And it's a change in mindset. John Harmon, former head of the Environment Agency and one of our board members, has a lovely phrase. He says, we need to decouple aspiration from consumption. In other words, what we do and who we are is not driven by what we buy and what we own. And I think that is absolutely key. We need to reclaim our place as citizens rather than consumers. Citizens have rights, but citizens also have responsibilities. And I think it's up to all of us to try and work on those. identify our own responsibilities, what we can do to contribute to the change. So there's a little snapshot of what I think contributes to a sustainable society. Our challenge will be to convince our various stakeholders that that is the case, and then to start putting it into policy, and to see also what the role of business is in achieving that. Thank you very much.